Everyone. Today we are going to be talking about housing. Housing refers to construction and assigned usage of houses or buildings. It is for the purpose of providing living spaces for people. Its purpose is to provide shelter, and the planning or provision of houses is delivered by a governmental authority. Housing, along with food and water, is considered one of the most important needs for any individual. This is because a proper shelter allows human beings to protect themselves from natural and man made elements, ensuring that members of society have a home in which to live and settle, whether this may be a house or any kind of dwelling such as lodging, rent, etc., is today considered a social issue. Governments often take care of housing needs by establishing a housing authority. Therefore, housing today is a legitimate political issue. Now let us talk about history of the housing method. Housing can be traced back to the advent of agriculture. Prior to agriculture, human beings used to live in hunter-gatherer societies. The shelters built by these communities was mostly temporary, as hunter-gatherers rarely settled at one place for a long period of time. As human beings started to practice agriculture, they started settling down. This was because their livelihood was dependent on a plot of land that was fertile for growing crops. Under such conditions, individuals started to live in gated communities, that is, communities that have a kinship or ancestral link with each other. This is why welfare of the individual and provision of shelter was seen as the duty of the community and not simply of the individual. Texts as ancient as Arthashastra speak of the king's duty of providing shelter to his subjects. In the Arthashastra, communities and not individuals were allowed to build their houses and shelter as they like. However, encroaching on someone's property invited punishment. Housing in Arthashastra is recognized of two kinds, rural as well as urban. Urban housing was done within fortifications. The forts had four different regions allocated for the four different castes. The text mandates the king to appoint officers who will ensure that there is a well for every 10 houses. Therefore, not just houses, but water supply was also considered the duty of the state. House building also had to take into consideration the natural elements that can damage it, such as rain, wind, storms, etc. In the modern industrial era, housing became entirely dependent on the capacity of the individual and the amount of capital that he accumulated and owned. Due to industrial revolution, means of production started to change rapidly. Several communities who used to earn their living through practice of ancestral profession started to collapse. This is because they used manual technique for production, which could not have competed with finished industrial grade goods. Hence, people from the villages started to migrate towards cities in a large number. Owing to this mass migration, we start to see that the cities became overwhelmed. They anyway lacked infrastructure to take the brunt of this mass migration, and therefore European cities started to see poor infrastructure, a rise of slums and shanties, etc. The workers who had recently migrated used to live in pathetic conditions as noted by many observers. Now, let us talk about housing and shelter in India. India comes under a low income category. That is, it has a per capita income of barely $2,000 per year, which can be converted into rupees up to 10 to 12,000 rupees per year. Because of this lack of income, India people in India also have very poor housing facilities. A majority of Indians have a per capita space that is less than 10 by 10 feet. It is not sufficient for their living, sleeping, cooking, washing, or toilet needs. Average area is 103 square feet per person in rural areas and 117 square feet per person in urban areas. Even the houses that have been built are not in proper condition and are mostly dilapidated. India sees one of the largest number of cases of building collapses. It also has one of the largest per capita homelessness in the world. According to the 2011 census, over 1.77 million people were listed under the homeless category, and the numbers are only rising. According to civil society organizations, these official numbers are not accurate and the numbers are much higher. Several reasons have been given for the housing crisis and homelessness. First, high real estate prices. In India, real estate prices are abnormally high because of high demand and low availability. Thus, proper housing is not available, especially for economically weaker sections and low income groups. Second, low income. India comes under the low income category, as stated before. Owing to the high real estate prices, people are unable to buy homes for themselves and their families. Disability and poor health costs a lot of money, and in India, health is mostly spent from out of pocket expenditures. Other reasons given are mental illnesses, because of which people are abandoned, domestic abuse, people are forced to flee their homes, as well as relationship failures. These are also considered reasons for homelessness. Now let us study the Ministry of Housing, India. Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs is a federal ministry that has authority over the formulation of administration and rules and regulations that are related to housing and urban development. It is the apex body that oversees national level plans and policies regarding housing and urban affairs. This ministry became independent from the original Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation in 2004. Since 1992, many of the duties of this ministry have been delegated to urban local bodies like municipal corporations, as the 74th Amendment gives greater constitutional status to these urban local bodies. The Central Public Works Department, Directorate of Printing, Estates, as well as Land and Development Office comes under the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. The same ministry also oversees several central government schemes such as Smart Cities Mission, Amrut, Hriday, Swachh Bharat Mission, etc. Now let us talk about Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, or PMAY, is an initiative of the Government of India that was launched in 2015 by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation. It is a central flagship scheme whose target is to build 2 crore affordable houses by a deadline of 2022. The Awas Yojana has two components, urban as well as rural. This scheme is converged with other schemes as well, so as to ensure that the houses built for the poor have a toilet, an electricity connection by the Saubhagya Yojana, an Ujjwala LPG connection, and access to drinking water. This scheme addresses specifically the needs of the economically weaker sections and lower income groups. In order to be eligible for this scheme, one has to be maximum 70 years of age, has to be of the economically weaker section, that is, family income must be less than 3 lakhs per annum, or they could belong to the low income group whose family income limit is 6 lakhs per annum, or middle income group 1 group, meaning 6 lakhs to 12 lakhs, and middle income group 2, meaning income is 12 lakhs to 18 lakhs. These groups are eligible for this scheme. Those who belong to the economically weaker section or lower income group get an interest subsidy of 6.5% for loan up to 6 lakh rupees, 4% subsidy for loan up to 9 lakh rupees, and 3% subsidy for loan up to 12 lakh rupees. For economically weaker sections, the government pays 1.5 lakh per house. The government seeks to invest money into slums so as to turn them into permanent housing for migrant workers. Rental housing has also been brought up recently during the COVID phase, as the migrant workers who had left during the lockdown have to be encouraged to come back. Let us solve some multiple choice questions. Which of the following ministry is responsible for implementation of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban PMAYU? Is it A, Ministry of Urban Development, B, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, C, Prime Minister's Office, or D, Ministry of Social Justice? Correct answer is B, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. The Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is a flagship scheme of the federal government of India, which seeks to provide 2 crore houses to the economically weaker sections, lower income groups, and middle income groups of the country. The idea is to provide subsidy rates on loans so that people of these sections can build a permanent house for themselves. It also seeks to turn slums into permanent residential centers. Next question. Housing crisis began in Europe because of A, poor legislation by monarchs, B, refugee crisis, C, industrial revolution, or D, none of the above. Correct answer, C, industrial revolution. When means of production started to getting industrialized, communities in rural areas started to fall apart because they could not compete with industrial centers when it came to production. This was because their means of production was only manual. Therefore, they started to migrate towards the urban areas, hoping to find work so that they can earn capital for themselves and their families. Unfortunately, this caused a flood of migrants in urban areas, and these urban areas were not prepared for such large numbers of people. Thus began one of the first housing crises, not just in Europe but also in the world.